A festival like this is a beautiful indication of the kind of thing that I truly, truly believe in, and I think makes our society more whole and more pure.
We do not take it for granted that Boulder was chosen as the first North American satellite festival. It's a huge honor we will not forget, and we are enriched because of it. We are indebted to both the local and international people that came together to make that happen, and we hope it's a tradition that continues for decades to come.
Literary festivals like this one build up an environment and an ecosystem to nurture readers and to promote the business of books. They provide an invaluable forum for writers to connect with other creative people.
We sit there peering into those electronic grids in front of our eyes, and it only increases the desire to see the real thing in the flesh. To actually hear an author speak firsthand, to read from their work, to hear the tones of their voice modulate as they read their most treasured passages of prose.
For us, it's special. This was our mothership, and it continues to be. The other editions that we have across the United States are smaller versions, different programming, but smaller versions.
Welcome back, everyone, to the first session of the day. On behalf of JLF Colorado, Festival co-directors Namita Gokali and William Dalrymple, Teamwork Arts, Boulder Public Library, and the City of Boulder, we welcome you to this session, Cultural Trauma, Legacy and Memory, with Erika Wurth and Kika Dorsey. Writers Erika Wurth and Kika Dorsey both write of the cultural trauma experienced by their forebears, of living with its legacy and the ongoing trauma this creates. They speak to one another about their personal experience and what compels them to document these memories in their work. We will begin with some readings. It is my great pleasure to introduce Erika Wurth. Erika Wurth's publications include 2 novels, Crazy Horse's Girlfriend and You Who Enter Here, 2 collections of poetry, and a collection of short stories, Buckskin Cocaine. A writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, she teaches creative writing at Western Illinois University and has been a guest writer at the Institute of American Indian Arts. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in numerous journals, including BuzzFeed, Boulevard, LitHub, The Writer's Chronicle, Bitch, Waxwing, and the Kenyon Review. She's soon to be on the faculty at Breadloaf in 2021 and is a Kenyon Review Writers Workshop Scholar, attended the Tin House Summer Workshop. And she's been chosen as a narrative artist for the Meow Wolf Denver installation. Erika is Apache, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and was raised outside of Denver. Please give a warm welcome to Erika Wurth. Over to you, Erika.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I am going to read from my newest novel in progress. I haven't read from it before. And I have a chapter that should be about 7 minutes, but if I have to end abruptly, that's why. To be clear, I rarely write autobiographically. I'm primarily a fiction writer. And the novel is called White Horse. It's a speculative novel, to use a fancy term, but in many ways it's sort of an elevated ghost story, I suppose. All right, I'm going to read chapter 15. I had Rust in Peace screaming through the speakers at the hangar bar, and since it was the late crowd, they were enjoying Mustaine's progressive, angry take on Ireland, the Cold War, drug addiction, Marvel superhero The Punisher, and UFOs. I remember reading that Mustaine and his band had to ride home in a bulletproof bus after playing for Northern Ireland, but that Mustaine had forgiven the Irish for selling bootleg copies of Megadeth t-shirts for the cause. I was about 2 whiskeys in and enjoying a stenosis-inducing headbang, specifically to Hangar 18. Mustaine was a genius at guitar, but this album was a particular favorite of mine. It was so ambitious, so clean, so quick, each wild riff culminating in a chainsaw reaction leading to, for my money, one of the best acoustic climaxes of all time. The only one not listening was Ed, a gentle schizophrenic who sat at the bar all day long, as soon as we opened, every day, all day, drinking watery Coors after watery Coors until we closed. Sometimes he would converse, sometimes he would sit comatose, looking at the giant beer can airplane that had hung on the ceiling of the bar for as long as I could remember. Shatter, shatter, Ed yelled, barely making a dent in the music, and I stopped banging long enough to pat him on the hand. I turned to a patron that I knew was due for another and got him a bud, the tap foaming over as I did. He grinned wickedly as I handed him the beer, and I gave him a wink and the sign of the devil and laughed. He laughed back, and we enjoyed a mutual bang. The door opened, and I smiled. It was Debbie. Red wine, I asked as she settled into a cracked red stool. Yes, she said, and I went and got her a glass. I didn't know how long she'd gotten away from Jack. I didn't know how she had gotten away from Jack, and I didn't want to. She sipped, and I leaned forward. Your outfit is peak Springs, Debbie said, giggling. I was wearing my faded gray jeans, black spike belt, and my tattered Metallica t-shirt. Tattered to symbolize when Mustaine was kicked out of the band. Shatter, shatter, Ed said, looking at Debbie, his green eyes piercing over his heavy black eyebrows. I pet his hand and he quieted. I turned the volume down just enough so that I could update Debbie on what had happened at Nessie's. By the time I'd given her the full scoop, she'd finished her glass. She slid it over the wood back towards me. I gave her a captain's salute and poured her another, took another shot for myself. Shoot, she said. Shit's right, I responded. Okay, like what's the game plan? The game plan? Yeah, like what are you going to do from here, she asked, because now that you've told that old man how he murdered his daughter, how you know he murdered his daughter, Carrie, it's on. I straightened. Fuck, Debbie, I don't know. I found out what I could from Google, the cops, your mom even. Gone over to Nessie's house. I'm kind of stumped. She gave me an exasperated, disappointed look. I'm not saying I'm giving up, I said, and seeing someone with an empty cup, I went over for a refill. When I came back, Debbie was cradling her glass thoughtfully in both hands. Let's start with what we want. Well, what I want to know is what happened to my mother. To make that old shit pay. That's pretty obvious. Right, now let's get to what's in the way. This is stupid, I said. Just indulge me, okay? Fine, Michael's in the way. I thought back to his look that day, his fury right before he'd slammed the door on me. For a second, I'd seen the beast. The thing I now knew was called the lofa. I Googled it. It was Chickasaw for a Bigfoot-style monster, but much, much more evil. Now, why would Michael not want you to find out? Well, shit, Debbie, he killed her. I'd already told her this. My theory was Cecilia had gone back for Sharon and they'd gotten into it, resulting in my mother's death. But why? What does it matter? Debbie let out an exasperated sigh and then sipped at her glass again, because that'll help us to figure out what happened when he murdered her. Think of things that are staring us right in the face. I knew it, Jack said. I hadn't even seen him come in. Jack, Debbie said like she'd been shot. She turned around to face him. He was right behind her, swaying drunkenly on his feet, his eyes blood red, his hair up in spikes. He looked like he'd been drinking all day. You said you were at your mom's, you fucking liar. Okay, Jack, cool it. What's going on? I asked. You shut up. Jack, I said in a low voice as people were starting to turn their heads. The hangar bar saw plenty of fights, but folks knew that the bartenders knew how to deal with trouble. You're in my place of business. I don't give a shit. You're a bad influence on my wife. Debbie stood up. Look, Jack, I'll go with you right now. We can talk about it on the way. Oh, no, he's not driving, at least not anymore, and you're certainly not getting in a car with him at the wheel. Jack's face turned red, and he took several steps toward me. I shook my head. You don't want to do that, Jack. Hell, I don't. He started wobbling toward me as rapidly as he could, and I moved. I came up and around him and locked my arms behind his back and twisted, bringing him to the ground. Fuck, he yelled, bucking. He was strong. I almost lost my grip on him, but then I laid one knee solidly in the middle of his back where I knew it would hurt. Old construction injury. He yelled in pain, and I could hear Debbie crying behind me, begging me not to hurt him. I ain't going to hurt him. I'm going to give him a choice, I said, panting as he struggled like a seal beneath me. Jack, I said, fuck you. Jack, you got two choices. One will give you a little bit of dignity, the other not so much. Dumb bitch, he said, twisting again and almost getting free. Just checking on my time 2 minutes ago. All right. Why do I get the feeling that you're angling for the non-dignity option? I said, pulling up with my knee and slamming down once more. He grunted in pain. Carrie, Debbie said, a hysterical note to her voice. I'd let him go, but he'd just come after me. Debbie, what do you want me to do? Get off of me, he screamed. I will, but here's the thing. When I do, we're going to walk over to Debbie's car and you're going to get in the back and she's going to put your stupid animal drunk ass to bed, or I'm calling the cops and you're going to the drunk take, even if you make another move towards me. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erika. I don't think I'm the only one now who wants to read the book, so thank you. We'll now turn to Kika Dorsey for a reading. And Kika Dorsey is a poet and fiction writer in Boulder, Colorado. Lives with her 2 children, husband, and pets. Her books include Beside Herself and 3 full-length collections, Rust, Coming Up for Air, and the recent publication, Occupied, Vienna is a Broken Man and Daughter of Hunger. She has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize 5 times. Currently, she is an instructor of English at Front Range Community College and works as a writing coach, editor, tutor, and ghostwriter. In her free time, she swims miles in pools and runs and hikes in the open space of Colorado's mountains and plains. Join me in welcoming Kika Dorsey. Over to you, Kika.
Thank you. I'm going to read from my most recent publication, Occupied. And this book is, just to give you some background before I read some of the poems, I'll read 3 poems. The first section is about post-war Austria and Germany, based on stories that my mother told me and research, and kind of the consequences of a country devastated by war. The second half are more personal stories. So the first poem, the title is Occupied, Vienna is a Broken Man and Daughter of Hunger. So I write a lot about hunger because this is what my mother always told me about growing up as a child, is the hunger she experienced. So the first one is hunger. I'm hungry all the time. We forage in the Alps for mushrooms and elderberry blossoms that we dip in cornmeal and fry from the butter of a neighbor's cow. The oak and beech disappear as I climb further to fir, larch, and pine. I pick edelweiss and arnica to set in the blue glass vase on our table. We eat the polenta with what we have gathered, and Muti is always angry, Fati a traveling tailor and never around, hungry stepchildren. Once we accidentally ate poisonous mushrooms. I knew something was wrong when the August light turned orange and from the faces of Russian soldiers emerged black beetles, and my brother lay holding his stomach and vomiting. My stomach is full of knives. It is an empty cavern where my dead mother dwells below budding breasts. Sometimes I want to cross the river Mur and never return. Sometimes the river roils in my body and I pull the sun into me. Sometimes I see a golden eagle on the elm tree. He looks royal, as if he's won a war. The next poem I'm going to read is actually the last poem. So that was the first poem of the first section. And this one is based on a character named Hannah, and it's called Hannah, and she's a mother. We live in the Fun Viertel, the aristocratic quarter of Potsdam, now full of mines, shattered cars, buckled bridges, and rubble. I take care of my teenage children, dress my daughter as a boy, and cut off her long plaits to save her from the Russians who throw grenades into the river, their form of angling, and roast the fish in fires. People hunt for booty, and we lost 8 watches and all our bicycles. My son traded our cuckoo clock for a bike rusted with white peeling paint, but that too got stolen. Time became the long days of foraging and waiting with no hands to show us a way out. One day I brought home a section of a dead horse and marinated it in vinegar and spices. Another day I had a share of a cow that had trodden on a mine. Once in the waters of Hasengraben were the contents of a cellar, and we waded in its water and brought back wine that we traded for bread and bacon. They said the Americans were coming, so we waited. The food was running out, so we ate potato flakes and the fruit and vegetables from abandoned gardens. And once I dodged Russian bullets to steal 25 kilos of potatoes that they were saving to distill for their vodka, which they drank like water. My teenage children are long and lanky, and they grow despite the hunger. Their lives were royal. Now they are scavengers like the crows that live in our beech tree and caw at me when I take the dead squirrel from them and cook it with carrots. I was once a Jew until I converted to Protestantism. I like the story of Gollum in Synagogue, that creature born of mud, and now parts of it cover my boots, worn from roaming the land for food. And I've forgotten the Hebrew letters to animate this death and bring it to life. I press my head against the earth on a warm spring morning, May green grass against my cheek, and my daughter carries her blue satchel to go scavenging, and she asks me what I am doing. I think of the waltz that brought my husband and me together before the war. And the earth yields no music, but it carries me, the small Jewish girl, and I say, I'm listening. The third poem I'm going to read is from the second section. So the second section of this book of poetry, they're more personal stories about my own personal legacy. And I'll talk more about that in our discussion, but this one is called My House. My house sits heavy on my shoulders. I've muscled my way across lakes and I've pushed babies out of me, whom I set in the kitchen of my house next to blenders, high chairs, torn towels, and the attic I save in my dreams. I walk with my house on my shoulders to a drugstore. They sell me pills that only I can swallow, made of strands of my mother's hair, my father's sharp teeth, my sister's dolls, and a white powder of promises from God's mouth, pledges of golden corn and rain. I swallow the pills and dream in the dark of my house floating on the sea. An old man on the roof fishing. When he catches one, he sets it on my lap, and I am hungry, but the fish has eyes like mine, so I throw it back to the sea. I am thirsty, but the sea is salt, so I let it feed the waves. I am a mother, so I am hungry and thirsty, and the Holy Ghost of my house has no wings but windows where I can watch the rain. I wake up every day to the house pressing me, and I rise with its roof of mind and basement of feet, of ancestors and memory. I trudge under its weight, searching for land where I can set it down, where I won't crush a harvest or block a prairie dog burrow. And I keep going, my spine bowing, blackbirds chortling, as if it were always dawn, as if the sun needs to be called home. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you, Kika. Such powerful words from both of you about real lives and, well, not real, fictional maybe, but difficult lives, difficult times. I think sometimes the sun does need to be called forth again. So Erika and Kika, I'd love to have you two engage in a little bit of conversation. And I know you both have written on many topics and themes, but it seemed to me you both have written directly or indirectly in fiction and in poetry of the impact from the legacy and memory of cultural trauma in the lives of individuals. And I'm just wondering, what has been your intent, or has there been an intent in illuminating this for readers and or for yourselves? So I throw it over to the two of you and look forward to seeing what you have to say. Thanks.
I guess I'm conscious of there's no way to be in this country and not be conscious of the fact that, you know, of Native American genocide, and that this country just doesn't, you know, in another timeline, right, this country would still have Native people. And in my case, you know, my father was white, my mother is Native American. And so I don't have any big traumas around that. It's just a fact. And so it does remind me of that historical fact. But I think I've been really interested in something called indigenous futurisms, which was a term invented by a woman named Grace Paley. She's a scholar, she's a Native scholar. I think she's Ojibwe, if I remember correctly. And basically it's something that mainly talks about speculative fiction and Native American fiction, and how the most important thing that we can do is kind of imagine ourselves in the future and not, you know, ignore those traumas, but really make sure there's joy and fun, and there's a way in which we're talking about our languages and our land and our traditions, our spirituality in a contemporary sense, and not just in a contemporary sense, but in the future. And so that's kind of what that's sort of in the back of my mind all the time now. Yeah.
Yeah, my intent originally was really just to tell my mother's story, because she was dying of Alzheimer's, and I wanted to bring to light stories that I didn't hear. So I did a lot of research about that time period. She often talked about growing up with hunger and the suffering as a child. So originally that was my intent. Also, I think what ended up happening for me is writing about the trauma of what does it mean to have a despot and to have the systemic racism and the consequences of it. And it spoke really strongly to me, considering it started becoming a book of poetry that was a book of warning of what could happen to our country if things got worse, you know, and they're already, you know, problematic. So that was my intent there. And then the second half of my book of poetry, my intent was more to come to terms with, you know, my family's history and, you know, their personal stories. My father was mentally ill and committed suicide, and so I tell some of those stories too.
Yeah, that's kind of what's great about poetry. I don't, like I said before, I don't write it anymore. That kind of impetus died. And it doesn't have to be confessional, but there's something kind of beautiful within all of that sadness, right? You can kind of pressurize the language, and you can talk about subject matter that can be really excruciating, like historically and personally. But you can kind of, this is the wrong word, but mythologize someone that you know deserves it or went through a lot and that means a lot to you, like with your mother. So that's that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So tell me, as far as poetry, what do you feel more comfortable writing as a writer, poetry or fiction? I write some fiction, but I definitely feel more comfortable writing poetry. What's your main genre, do you feel, or do you have one?
Yeah, it's always been fiction. I haven't written a poem in I years and years and years. It just died. And when I was a kid, I didn't read a lot of poetry. I read mainly what is now called speculative literature. And, someone tried to give me a copy of like To Kill a Mockingbird. And I was like, where are the dragons? I was very confused. And so even when I was a kid, the idea that I would have ever been a poet would have been like, what, a poet? I mean, I think my ideas of what that meant were so abstract. I didn't know any poets. No one really gave me poetry. The poetry I read in high school was super old fashioned. But it's something that kind of, I think probably for those reasons I described earlier, like that pressurization of language, the way that you could talk about people, like difficult subject matter, but in a beautiful way. I liked that. And it did kind of compel me to write poetry for a while. And then it just died. And I think it's because probably a lot of reasons, but mainly because I've always been a fiction writer when it really came down to it. And I just didn't have the mental energy to do both. And fiction just took up my world. So yeah. What drew you to poetry? Like what do you think that form really, why does that speak, this sounds cheesy, but like speak to the artistic soul of you?
I don't know. I started writing poetry at such a young age. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And it came so naturally to me. My father was a musician. He composed music, and my mother was a visual artist. And possibly the musical quality of it, the rhythm, creating a song. I think that was probably part of it for me. I find that, when I write fiction, I do think they inform each other. Like, I think it's good for a writer to be able to write in both forms, and they can inform each other. But fiction for me feels laborious. I'll do it, and I have moments where I enjoy it. But it requires plot, and I have a hard time with plot.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I think you just have to be compelled to do the labor for some reason, right? You just have to, because I think poetry, it absolutely is work, it's craft, it's study, it's all those kinds of things. There's no way around it. But when you're doing fiction, that's what I like. That's what I feel like I've taken and I've written more poetry technique inspired fiction. Like my collection called Buckskin Cocaine, which is about the Native American film world. And I usually read from that, but I decided to do something new tonight. But that one, I try to take poetic technique and use it because there's no way around it. The way in which the music of the language comes through in poetry is so fabulous. And I think even if you're not doing what I was doing in that book, you should be paying attention to that in fiction. But for me, I'm paying attention to that in fiction, but then I'm taking care of characterization and plot and structure. And you're right, it takes way more time. It just does.
Yeah.
It's just insane,
Although poetry, if you want to be good at it, it's also time consuming. I mean, I can spend a lot of time on one poem, and then other times one poem flows pretty much. For this, I spent a lot of my time in this book had to do with research. I did a lot of research. I interviewed people. I, read books about the history. I had to figure out like how many apricots did people barter for how many bottles of schnapps, after the war, because there was a historical element. And I read that you have also done some research and interviews. So tell me about that. I'm curious how you use research.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the thing that people super quickly backing up that people think about poetry is that it's just this easy emotional, exposition, right? You can just be like, here are my feelings on a page and everyone will clap. But you're right, good poetry takes research and time and craft. And I think people have really, if you don't do poetry right, people have strange ideas about it. But as far as research goes, yeah, I think my first novel, for example, was probably a little bit more within the realm of what I know. It was not necessarily 100% autobiographical, although that was there, but it was within the realm of closer to what I know and what I've experienced. But I still had to do research. I still had to before, when I first started doing research, you weren't Googling, you were calling cops. You were like, okay, what happens if this happens? And they're actually very nice and indulgent. For You Who Enter Here, that was a novel about Native American gangs. And I did a ton of research for that because I had some peripheral experience, you could say, growing up with that. But mainly, I wanted to know about what the gangs were like in Albuquerque. And I lived there on sabbatical for a year. And I interviewed cops and I interviewed former gang members. I interviewed people who worked with gang members. I interviewed people who, did all that kind of stuff. So it was super interesting. But it's funny because that's the one I ended up doing so much research for, and now it's just this unbelievably dark, morose novel, really. So it goes,
I definitely have a lot of dark and morose in my work, so obviously, it's about a hard time period. But I want my next work to be a little more uplifting, and I'm thinking maybe we could just say a little bit about what our projects are now, which is basically I don't really have a project, except I kind of do. I've been reading the Old Testament and reading Genesis and retelling, and I actually have a piece of flash fiction that was based on the Adam and Eve myth that got published. And I wrote a book about Noah's son, Shem. And just reading the Old Testament is just it's so ripe for my feminism and my interpretation of the and so it's really, but what about you? What's your next?
My other computer was beeping. Yeah, this is what I love about poets, though. You guys are like, I was reading the Old Testament and I was really inspired. I'm like, wow, because, as you can see from my excerpt, I was reading a lot about Megadeth. And my character loves horror novels and she loves Megadeth. And that's what I'm working on now. It's this ghost story about a girl who's always hated her mother because as far as she is concerned, right, she abandoned her when she was 2 days old. And her father never got over it. He got into a huge car accident because of it. He was drinking and driving because of this. And she's had to care for him his whole life. And then she touches a bracelet of her mother's that her cousin found. And boom, she's thrust into this really wild, violent vision from the past. And my character carries a happy person otherwise. So looks like our time is up. But yeah, lovely speaking with you though, Kika.
Lovely speaking with you. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thank you both. I knew you both would have a really provocative and deep conversation with each other, and that's what we've experienced. So thank you so very much. It's so powerful and illuminating, the amount of knowledge and research that goes into good writing. I think many of us don't actually understand the work that goes into really good writing, that then we just enjoy ourselves appreciating, sit back with a good book. And I love the processing of darkness and pain through writing, and the way, Erika, you're working with transforming the past into imagining a different future. That's really illuminating. So thank you both so very much. It's
thank
a
you.
Pleasure. Yeah. And thank you all for being a great audience and for watching. We encourage you to buy the books of our speakers that are available through the Boulder Bookstore within the USA, who ships all throughout the USA, and Full Circle within India. please do follow our handles on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and stay apprised of upcoming sessions. Also, please stay tuned to jlflitfest.org/Colorado for the full schedule and information about our upcoming speakers. In these unusually difficult times, we have struggled to bring you JLF Colorado without charging a registration fee. If you're able to, please donate as generously as you can to JLF Colorado to ensure a free, seamless, and continuous flow of knowledge, and that we come back in 2021. Once again, we would like to thank all our official partners. We hope you enjoyed this conversation and will tune in for our next session, Oceans and the New Thalassology, which is the study and human history of our oceans. David Abulafia in conversation with William Dalrymple at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 9 p.m. EST, 6 p.m. PST, and 7:30 a.m. IST. Teamwork Arts, in association with Pratham Books, the Kamini and Vindi Banga Family Trust, and Save the Children, are delighted to present Kahani in its digital avatar, which brings together stories from across the globe and celebrates the timeless art of storytelling in its myriad forms. This digital series creates a safe virtual space for children, encouraging them to think outside the box and fully uncover the realm of their imagination and creativity. For more information, visit www.kahanifestival.com. Thank you again, everyone. And now we present a reading by Malati Mathur from the Jaipur Writer Shorts series.
Hello, I am Malati Mathur. I am a professor with the Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. I write poetry, a little bit of travel writing, and also some translation. I'll be reading out a couple of my short poems. What the Mist Said. I met the morning mist as I walked across dew-drenched grass. As always, cool arms wrapped around me, leaving sparkling droplets of joy. You haven't come by lately, I whispered to the gentle presence. But I am with you always, said the mist. Peer into the mirror up close, really close. Do you see me then? Look for me when a mother blows on the porridge, cooling it for her little one. See how I waft across and mingle with the breath of the father and his infant, tossed aloft in play and laughter. And when you remember your friends who have passed, who is it that comes across your vision of the clear sky? I am the rain, the river and the ocean, the tears of joy and the shower of sorrow. I am the dew at daybreak that tells of transience and also of resurrection the next dawn. I am the life breath of the universe, and I am you and all the selves that you were, are, and will ever be. Shared remembrance. Across the Batcave Temple is the sea, mild, chattering quietly to the black sand beach, dotted with shacks stretching out into the distance. A crowd of people in Balinese attire, holding flowers, priest on a small platform, offerings at the black stone altar on the sand. The women glance at me and smile. Where are you from? India elicits a delighted smile. What rituals are these? Some confusion, exchange of glances. Then, you know Rip? This is Rip prayers. Ah, that mellow golden morning, bathed in serenity and life and memories of travelers gone down the eternal path. Those brief moments fuse time and space. We turn to look at the sea as the waves of past and present grief wash over us together. Thank you.
I would call the Jaipur Literature Festival a living library, or perhaps even a library of life. Do join us as we share the excitement of ideas and of debate and dialogue, of the adventures of science, of the joys of poetry and music, the consolations of philosophy, the sense of literature and of life.
I had heard so much about the festival in India, the scale of it, the energy of it, and I just love the fact that there is this effort to bring it to other cities in the world.
It's a variety of topics. It's meaningful. I'm just excited. I'm feeling like I've learned a lot to think about, and I appreciate JLF coming here.
Going forward, it would be a very good thing to do for the community to have this event on an annual basis.
I think that when you hear so many different voices and perspectives about the South Asian diaspora and many other issues, you learn that there's a lot of history that you're not taught every day, and I think that that's important to bring in today's world.
I was actually really surprised by the camaraderie I experienced here and the way that people at JLF, both attendees and other panelists, seem to really connect profoundly to literature and care about it.
In 2020, our live version of JLF has been laid to waste because of COVID-19. However, nothing's going to stop us from coming in the way of bringing our writers and speakers to you in Boulder, Colorado, Houston, New York, and Toronto, Canada.
Festival like this is a beautiful indication of the kind of thing that I truly, truly believe in, and I think makes our society more whole and more pure.
We do not take it for granted that Boulder was chosen as the first North American satellite festival. It's a huge honor we will not forget, and we are enriched because of it. We are indebted to both the local and international people that came together to make that happen, and we hope it's a tradition that continues for decades to come.
Literary festivals like this one build up an environment and an ecosystem to nurture readers and to promote the business of books. They provide an invaluable forum for writers to connect with other creative people.
We sit there peering into those electronic grids in front of our eyes, and it only increases the desire to see the real thing in the flesh, to actually hear an author speak firsthand, to read from their work, to hear the tones of their voice modulate as they read their most treasured passages of prose.
For us, it's special. This was our mothership, and it continues to be. The other editions that we have across the United States are smaller versions, different programming, but smaller versions.